All right, hello everybody, and welcome to our workshop. We're going to be talking about moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. And before we get started, just quickly, the room does have a chat box in it, and if you have questions while we're going, feel free to type questions in chat and we'll try to answer them. And of course, we're going to have a pretty extended Q&A at the end of the talk. And I would just ask that you keep yourself muted throughout the workshop and rely on chat if you do have questions while we're going. So with that, here's our agenda for today. We're going to start talking a little bit about what's new with Drupal 9. And the bulk of our time is going to be talking about preparing for your upgrade or your update from Drupal 7 and getting ready to move into Drupal 9. And as I said, at the end, we're going to have some time for Q&A. But first, some quick introductions. I'm Mike Madison. I'm a manager on Aqua's professional services team. I'm based in Seattle. And I'm particularly excited to be doing this workshop today because I get to do a workshop with WebChick, with Angela Byron. And I actually told her this earlier today, but I'm going to embarrass her and do it again now. When I started learning Drupal 11 years ago, and in fact, I actually have it sitting right here. It was this book that got me started.
No way.
Still an easy reach. So anyway, I'm just very excited to be here chatting with one of my Drupal heroes today.
Well, gosh, I don't know how to follow that up. Thanks, Mike. So my name is Angie. I also go by WebChick on Drupal.org. I've been involved in Drupal since 2005 when I was a Google Summer of Code student. And since then, I've just went crazy and try to get involved in every aspect of Drupal possible. So these days I'm a core committer, I'm a product manager for Drupal, and I'm also here at Aqua on the Drupal acceleration team. So my job is basically to find the biggest, hairiest problems for Drupal and solve them. And so lately what that's manifested itself as is being the product owner of the Aqua Migrate Accelerate product, which we'll touch on a little bit later, but the bulk of this workshop is going to be more on practical hands-on advice and stuff. So yeah, but thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, and welcome all of you who have joined us here today. And I'm wondering, as we get started, if maybe you could just post in chat if your organization's still primarily on Drupal 7, if you've started your Drupal your process of upgrading to Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. I'd definitely be interested to see sort of who we've got. So yeah, throw it on out there. All right, so moving on, let's talk a little bit about what's new in Drupal 9. Angie, do you want to maybe give us the rundown there?
Sure thing, yeah. What's new in Drupal 9 is kind of an it depends sort of question. And the reason for that is it depends largely on which version of Drupal that you're using now. If you've been using Drupal 8, Drupal 9 is essentially not much other than updated various requirements of the dependent libraries that we have, as well as an easy upgrade path from 8 to 9. So that's the big news about Drupal 9. If you're on Drupal 8, is it's no big deal. You know, it's great. That's the thing. If you have been using Drupal since Drupal 7, however, which came out almost 10 years ago, there's actually quite a bit that's changed between Drupal 7 and Drupal 9. So for example, if we click to the next slide, there's been numerous improvements for content authors, things like Layout Builder, which is a page building tool out of the box, richer media management, mobile-friendly browsing out of the box, all of these kinds of things that you would have to have gotten contributed modules for, and several of them in Drupal 7 now just ship out of the box in Drupal 9. If we click to the next slide, there's also a ton of site builder improvements. So we've added the views module to core and integrated it in a lot of different areas. We've made multilingual a core part of the core product. Configuration management is now built into all configuration. It assumes it's going to go through a dev prod or a dev stage prod workflow, and tons of things like that. If we go to the next slide, there's also been a ton of improvements for developers. So the entire code base written on modern object-oriented PHP and Symfony, a much more powerful and robust cache API, which can make page loads in many cases much, much faster than they used to be. A migrate API, composer support, modern web standards, all of these different things. And if we go to the next slide, when you get onto the Drupal 9 train, not only do you benefit from all of these, past things that we've added, but you also get access to all the new things that are currently in development. So things like various design improvements, both to the front end and back end of Drupal, modernized JavaScript support, trying to, turn these JavaScript libraries into first-class citizens within the Drupal ecosystem. Automatic updates, a big deal to make sure that your security updates come on time. You don't have to be up until 3 in the morning if you're in Australia, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's really exciting stuff. And Olivero, the front-end theme for Drupal that Lullabot is designing, just got committed this week. So it's really exciting stuff. But yeah, so those are all the things that are new and reasons why you might want to move to Drupal 9. I think the biggest reason to move to Drupal 9 is also just the fact that we're on a predictable release cycle now. And so every 6 months, without fail, you'll get a new release of Drupal. It will have new features. It will be backwards compatible. And that's much better than the olden days when it was ready when it's ready. And we break your code, not your data. Those days are kind of in the past now. So yeah.
Very cool. A lot of exciting innovation that's happened in the nearly 10 years since Drupal 7 was released. So let's talk a little bit about preparing for your update. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is actually interchangeable between Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. So if you hear us say Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, there are some really good reasons to do one or the other, and we'll cover some of those. But just in general, know that moving from D7 to D8 or moving from D7 to D9 is going to be a very similar sort of activity. A couple of important dates I want to start out with. So Drupal 9 actually released several months ago in June, and Olivero and some of the other features Angie was just mentioning will be releasing in Drupal 9.1, which comes out in a few weeks at the beginning of December. Drupal 8 is actually going end of life in November 2021, so just about a year from today. And this is actually one of the reasons you will see us recommend, if you're on Drupal 7, to actually go directly to Drupal 9. Because if you do a big migration from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, you will have to upgrade to Drupal 9 sometime. And this date, by the way, is not actually being driven so much by the Drupal community. It's being driven by the Symfony community. The version of Symfony that Drupal 8 relies on, Symfony 3, is actually going end of life at this time. So we are kind of forced to go end of life. And you'll notice that Drupal 7 is actually going end of life now a year later in November 2022. I believe COVID was actually the reason for that delay. But rest assured, there will be some vendors like Aqua that will provide ongoing paid support for Drupal for 2 or 3 years, I believe, beyond the end of the community support. And then, of course, Drupal 10. Yes, we're already talking about Drupal 10. There's already code being written for Drupal 10, is scheduled for June 2022. These dates are really important, particularly in the context of this session, because if you take a look at our current usage data, I actually just went and pulled this from a couple hours ago, you'll see that roughly 600,000 of the reported 1 million Drupal installs, and again, this is just the reported installs, it's not complete coverage, but roughly 61% of the reported installations of Drupal are still running Drupal 7. And what that means to you is that there's a really significant change coming for your platform sometime in the not so distant future. If you're already on Drupal 8, I know a few people in chat said that they're in the process of migrating from D7 to D8 or just launched on D8. It's going to be a pretty minor change. The whole point of the new Drupal ecosystem in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 is those major upgrades are much less major than they used to be. But if you're on Drupal 7 or even older versions of Drupal, it's going to be a much more significant change. And as we could see from those usage stats, there's still a really large percentage of our community that's running Drupal 7. And as Angie mentioned, there are going to be updates coming more regularly, which is awesome. And you should essentially plan, as we saw with the Drupal 10 release date in 2022, you should plan on doing a major Drupal version upgrade every couple of years. So, if you upgrade to Drupal 9 now, you should plan in about a year and a half to upgrade to Drupal 10 and so on and so forth. And those upgrade processes are much, much, much simpler once you're in that Symfony Drupal 8, Drupal 9 ecosystem. It's going to be a much bigger step from Drupal 7, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about here today. So with the numbers in the state that they're in, we're in one of a couple of scenarios. If you're already on Drupal 9, high five. I don't know that this workshop's going to have a lot of good stuff for you. If you're on Drupal 8, some of what we're going to talk about here is still relevant, but the majority of the content for this workshop is for those of you still running Drupal 7. And the disclaimer that we sort of wanted to present coming right into this is that even though we're talking about updating, we're talking about upgrading, there is no update path from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. It is a complete rebuild. Now, there are migrate plugins that Drupal core in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 ship with to help you get your data from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 or 9. You could use a product like Aqua's Migrate Accelerator, which we'll talk about more here in a little bit, and there was some other content to engage on that. But at the end of the day, your choice is essentially to do that complete rebuild to recreate your site in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. And once you've done that really big jump, you shouldn't have to do that again. The update from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 is literally you just install the new version of Drupal, run some database updates, and you're done. Like it's a much less significant deal than a complete rebuild. So let's talk about what that complete rebuild looks like and what you would do in an ideal world, right? Ideally, you would treat this like a completely new project. Right. And especially if you've been on Drupal 7 for the better part of a decade, if you're talking about a website that you built many, many years ago, you may have some real technical debt there. You may have some decisions that were made 5 or 6 years ago that maybe don't make sense in 2020 for your organization. So treating this like a new project means re-engaging with your stakeholders, revisiting the requirements for your platform and having that sort of honest discussion like you might on a brand new project. How are we going to do this? Do we want this to work this way? Is the way we're doing this today working? Think about the architecture. Actually build out and test the site. Migrate your existing content where possible. Rewrite some of the content where possible. Like use this as the sort of advantage that it is to start fresh, because you in essence do have to start with a new code base. Thinking about reviewing your current site, there's a few things that hopefully make a lot of sense, right? The first is looking for redundancies. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but like, do you have the right content types? Do you have the right views? Do you have the right modules? You can build or you should build an inventory of contributed modules that you're using currently to try and understand whether or not those modules are in fact compatible with Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, and they aren't always. Look at your custom code. Check for API changes and check to see if maybe what you're doing in code now is actually something that comes out of the box with Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, because it may be. Governance is another big thing I always like to talk about. This is a very non-technical topic, right? Governance is, how do you decide what goes into your framework? I can't tell you on our professional services team how many organizations we've gone into and started doing architecture planning or discovery for a platform. And we realize as we're wading into that conversation that the problem that organization is facing with their platform is not a technical problem. It's because they have 30 people coming to their IT team or their development team or their web team or however they self-identify, making all of these requests for what we're going to do. And the team is constantly putting out fires, constantly jumping from thing to thing, constantly making little tweaks and hacking CSS and HTML on the live site. And what you end up with is this really unstable, really fragile platform, not because Drupal's bad, not because the development team's doing a poor job, but because they don't have a support network or a governance process in place to sort of weed out those requests that shouldn't be happening, right? So again, completely building a new platform, doing this update is a really good opportunity to review all of your processes, not just your technical ones. Standardize and adopt best practices. As Angie sort of alluded to in our overview of Drupal 9, there's some really significant changes in Drupal 8 and 9. Dependency management, object-oriented PHP. You're going to be seeing really significant tweaks to the types of tools that you're using. And I see a question asking about slides changing. Yes, they should be changing. I was going to say, are you guys missing slides? It looks like Angie sees some changing. Should be on a slide that says standardize and adopt best practices right now.
Yeah, I think maybe James, try popping out of hit the little hang up button and then come back in the room, and that should reset it. If anyone else is having that problem. I
was going to say, it looks like we've got a mixed bag. So yeah, I apologize, James. Please, like Angie said, maybe hop out and hop back in. Anyway, so we're not going to do a super deep dive into development methodologies for the purposes of this talk. Just be aware that the best practices for Drupal 7 in terms of how you develop things, using features, using Drush, using whatever tools you used, because of the configuration management system, because of Composer, because of object-oriented coding, the world is a different place today. So I would definitely do some investigation into what the sort of current best practices are and what some of the sort of modern technologies involved with Symfony and Drupal development are. Because again, the ecosystem is in a very different place today than it was a decade ago. And, as somebody that works with Drupal daily, I think these are all really good changes. They're not necessarily all easy changes, but they are very good changes. And I think learning about these new practices and integrating them into your development processes will improve the quality of your development. Testing. So, again, many older Drupal 6, Drupal 7 platforms maybe didn't have a ton of testing. Drupal as a platform has a lot better testing today because of PHP Unit and Nightwatch than we did a decade ago. And, because of the different development paradigms and the updated standards being used today in the community, it's easier than ever to write your own tests. So again, visit your testing protocols. Think about, as you build this new platform from the ground up, can you also build in test coverage, not just build out the custom code, but have tests to test your code? Again, take advantage of the situation. Wrong direction, sorry. And as you think about reviewing your old sites, we already talked about this slide, actually. There we go. Let's talk about looking for redundancies. So do you need stuff that you've got in your current platform? If you have a bunch of stuff, is there something in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 that can actually help you revise the way you're doing it? So, Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 have very different entity structures. So for instance, in Drupal 7, web form basically creates custom nodes, right? If you're using a form module, you end up with web form nodes. In Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, web forms are custom entities. So they're a completely different type of content than nodes. Custom blocks are a whole new thing in Drupal 8. So maybe just a quick example there. If we're looking at a Drupal 7 site, I actually worked with a customer a couple years ago who, in their Drupal 7 ecosystem, that had 5 different content types for articles. They had a base article type. They had a news article, which was actually identical to the base article, but it was used in a different way. So the normal article was more like a publication. The news article was for their newsroom and their alert feed. And then they had 3 additional types of articles, which were also identical to the base article, except like the map article had a couple of extra fields to propagate a Google map. The iframe article had an iframe. The table article had a table. So the end result was 5 content types that basically had 99% of the same fields on them. Just each of the 5 was used for a really hyper-specific thing. In a Drupal 9 ecosystem, you might still have 5 different types of content, 5 different entity bundles. But in this case, I would actually recommend having a single content type, which is article. I would recommend having 3 different custom block types, 1 to propagate your map, 1 to propagate your iframe, 1 to propagate your table, and then an article type in vocabularies or taxonomies that would let you tag an article as a news article or a standard article or whatnot. And the end result here, like from the end user facing perspective, is we're still going to have our newsroom, we're still going to have our publications, we're still going to have maps and iframes and tables, but the underlying content architecture is going to be completely different because we're using that updated entity API in Drupal 9 sort of to our advantage. Because now we've got 1 article to maintain. We don't have 5 copies with 5 different sets of fields and you know, essentially 5x the work. Anytime we want to tweak styling or field updates or anything like that to the article. So this is a simple example, but you know, hopefully this is an example of what I'm talking about, and taking a step back and looking at what you're doing today and seeing, hey, we did this thing years ago to meet this need. Obviously, we still maybe have the need. Is there a better way to fulfill that need using the tools available to us? The other thing I want to recommend briefly is to actually use something called the Drupal Spec tool. And if you're not familiar with the Drupal Spec tool, our colleague Travis Carden built this. This is an open source tool. It is free to use. But basically what the Spec tool lets you do is create a Google Sheet that allows you to define your content architecture. And this is prefabricated with everything that comes with Aqua Lightning, which is an open source distribution for Drupal 8 and 9. But as you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to build out my article, what fields are required for my article, what views are required for my article, you can use this as a source of truth for all of the site building that you need to do in your site. Works as a really great way to capture an inventory of the various components of your site, blocks, taxonomy, media, menus, anything that you need to build out. Spec tool is a really great option for you to document as part of your process. And when I'm writing tickets for my developers, I actually will put, like, right in the acceptance criteria, you know, make this article content type match up with the Drupal Spec tool. When my testers and product owners are testing, they go through and use the Spec tool to compare as well. Review contrib. So first and foremost, not everything that you're using in Drupal 7 is a thing anymore, right? So the libraries module is not currently Drupal 9 compatible. There are some patches to make it work, but most of the libraries API has actually been sort of consumed into Drupal core. The rules module, like, honest to God, I don't think I built a Drupal 7 site without rules. I have yet to build a Drupal 8 site with rules, and it's still in alpha. You know, there are sites that are using it, but it's not stable for Drupal 8 because it's not nearly as widely used in D8 as it was in D7. There are many modules from D7 that aren't actually needed for Drupal 9. Views is a great example of that. Views is now in Drupal core. It's awesome. And you don't actually need a separate module for views anymore. And you also need to be really cautious to make sure that it's even a thing anymore. So the admin menu is not a Drupal 8 menu. There's a new Drupal 8, Drupal 9 menu called admin toolbar. So you carefully want to go through and review your modules. And the Migrate Accelerator, Aqua's product, will actually help with a lot of this to help find and define modules that you either could use or should use in the future. As you're going through and reviewing your modules, this should lead to some discussion, right? Do we need the thing that we're using today, right? Do we need rules? Well, we're using rules for this. Cool. How do we do that in Drupal 8? It could be that you use a Drupal contrib module. It could be that you use some custom code. And it could very well be, as we said with views, that there's something in core that does it for you now. Just remember that the priority should always be use whatever core gives you first. And if core can't do it, then use well-supported contrib. And if well-supported contrib doesn't do it, then fine, go write something custom. But my hope is that your experience will be similar to mine, and that on most of your builds, you have a very small footprint of custom code. And what custom code you are writing should extend and build upon either core or contrib classes and methods and things like that, right? So that you're not having to maintain just thousands and thousands of lines of custom hooks and stuff to override and change to make them work the way you want.
Yeah, that's also going to make your future upgrades to Drupal 10 and Drupal 11 and so forth much more straightforward, the less custom code that you have.
Exactly. And when you do start doing custom code, like, again, there are some really significant changes between the way custom code is written in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 and 9. Again, the vast majority of things are not hooks anymore. Like in Drupal 7, everything was a hook. There are still hooks in 8 and 9, but not a ton. Again, object-oriented PHP, robust plugin system. I'm linking here to a tutorial for upgrading the pants module to a Drupal 8, Drupal 9 code base. I've got a blog article on writing it. But at the end of the day, what you really need to do, like, just keep calm, read the manual, read the docs, be prepared for some changes. But they're very well documented. And, I think one of the biggest differences in Drupal 8, Drupal 9 is that there's so many examples in Drupal core that you can just go look at how Drupal itself is doing something and then emulate that. Hopefully that'll make a big change in your day-to-day. But you do need to know all of your custom code is going to change. Even the most simple form alter function from Drupal 7 has to be changed for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. Maybe a very minor tweak, it may go away entirely, or it may be a complete and total rewrite, but all of your custom code is going to change somehow. And I strongly recommend that if you or your team are not already comfortable doing basic object-oriented programming, so extending classes, using methods from elsewhere in the code, using a debugger, using an IDE, these are definitely skills you're going to want to brush up on before you start doing back-end development for Drupal 8 and 9. The site building experience for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 is virtually identical to Drupal 7. Like, the actual admin experience is very similar, but the back-end and front-end development experiences are a little different. There's also a project that I believe Aqua sponsored that helps you do some basic updates to modules. So if you have a module that you need to upgrade, this Drupal module upgrader module can actually help automate some of that as well. Just keep in mind that, as we said a moment ago, not 100% of the code that you're using in Drupal 7 may be needed in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. So this will help you upgrade. It's not going to tell you whether or not you should upgrade. So a couple of key takeaways. Just because Drupal 7 looks a lot like Drupal 8 and 9 in the admin experience doesn't mean all the things are the same. And in fact, most of the things aren't the same. There was a lot of care put into making it look similar to the classic Drupal experience. Not everything you used in Drupal 7 is needed or available in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. And make sure you're, especially if you're working towards Drupal 9, but if you're working on Drupal 8, pay really close attention to the API, because there's already stuff that was in Drupal 8.0, 8.2, 8.4, whatever, that's been deprecated and it's gone. So if you rebuild your site from D7 to D8, but you're not paying attention to deprecated code as you do it, you're actually going to have to go back through and update your code again before you can upgrade to Drupal 9 in the future, which is a big deal.
So everything that Mike just got done saying is absolutely true. If you can, the best way to do a 7 to 9 migration is to stop and reevaluate everything, get all the stakeholders involved, build the site the way you want it to be built, not the way that you built it back in 2011 when that made sense. However, sometimes you just want to take what you got and get it onto Drupal 9 as quickly as possible without a lot of fuss. And for that, we created a product called Aqua Migrate Accelerate, which aims to do that. And so what Aqua Migrate Accelerate essentially is 4 different things. It is an Aqua Cloud dedicated environment for doing your migration. So you can keep your Drupal 7 site up and running in perpetuity while the migration is happening and nothing is, crossing the streams there. It is an enhanced migration capabilities. Like we build on top of Drupal's Migrate API, but add some additional things to help make dependency management easier, things like that, as well as a nice React UI that's all swishy, wishy, and fun. I wouldn't ever call migrations fun, but like we try to make it as fun as possible. And then the last bit is exactly what Mike mentioned before, where anyone who does a 7 to 9 migration generally has that like spreadsheet of doom where you got like all of your contributed modules over here and then mapping them to what their Drupal 9 equivalents are and what special patches you need in this kind of thing. We did a lot of that homework and we put it all together in a module recommendations engine. And so we will generate a Drupal 9 code base for you that automatically has the appropriate Drupal 9 modules for your Drupal 7 functionality, along with whatever patches are required to make it happen, that kind of thing. So we don't need to replicate this research 100,000 times for everybody who's moving. So if we go to the next slide, I can cover a couple of the capabilities. There's a little silly video just kind of showing it in action, but
you want me to go ahead and start that?
Yeah, sure. It just plays like in the background there. But yeah, so we basically give you a migration dashboard, which you can use to check off all the stuff. We take great pains to put this in site builder terminology rather than developer terminology, so that you can kind of get a sense of progress right away and early. And then we count up a progress meter as things are happening. There's a place where you can review the errors coming out, both errors from the migration system as well as we'll catch, like, say, for example, entity validation problems that are actually data integrity issues on your source site. And we give you the ability to see all the modules that we've picked out for you and why, all kinds of things. So if you're looking to get off of Drupal 7 onto Drupal 9 without doing all of the really good stuff that Mike just said, which you should definitely reevaluate your content model and all that kind of stuff. But if you just want to shove it onto Drupal 9 as quickly as possible, that's what Aqua Migrate Accelerate is about. So,
like we said right at the top of this session, without something like Drupal Migrate Accelerator or Accelerate, there is no option to do it quickly, right? So this is so cool, and it's so exciting that this option exists, because we recognize that not all organizations have the time, the money, or the resources to do it all the way over again, right? Doing a complete rebuild can be quite costly and quite time consuming. So this is such a good option if you're looking at that time going, wow, November 2022, that's, that's 2 years off, but that's not a ton of time. This really is such a good option if you're looking at that deadline going, look, there's just no way we're ever going to get funding or a team that's capable of doing this really significant migration in that time. So
yeah, though I do want to clarify, it is not a magic button. It is not like you click it and boom, you're on Drupal 9 and there's unicorns and everything. It's like you still have to do all of the hard work.
The unicorns are extra, right? We charge extra.
They're extra, yeah. You need to be at least an elite member of, no, I'm just kidding. Like we can't do much about your custom code, and that refers also to your front end code. Almost everybody uses a custom front end, so that stuff still does need a developer to be involved. We do offer integration with Site Studio to make the front end stuff a little bit less codey, but it's still a job. The big thing I want people to take away from this, though, is not necessarily that I mean, we have to call Drupal 7 and 9. It is what it is. It's a big jump. But the big reason to do it is that once you're on Drupal 9, or Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 to Drupal 10, now you're looking at an upgrade path that's an actual upgrade path, not a migration path. And there's people who've done it in a weekend. It's very much more straightforward. We deliberately made the module system so Drupal 8 modules and 9 modules can run in the same system simultaneously. So there's been a lot of emphasis on making sure that this migration is the last hard migration that you're going to have to do. So I see the question: how do we get Migrate Accelerate and can use it immediately? So it's still in development. It's currently in beta. We're shooting for a limited availability release in Q4 is about as much as I can say. I would love to give you a specific date, but I just don't have it right now. We're working as hard as we can to get it out as quickly as possible, because we know that people really need this and they need it out there.
So Stephen also has a question before we move on. Over 400 blocks translated into 2 languages assigned to various pages throughout. How does one best approach that use case? So, Stephen, I think there's 2 very broad scenarios to consider with that many blocks, right? Either through door number 1, you have a common set of features, maybe 5 or 10 or 20 or however many different types of blocks that have been replicated a bunch. Or through door number 2, you have a bunch of unique blocks that are very much one-offs that don't have sort of replicated uses. Ideally, I always try to recommend as much as possible to follow a component-based design approach. So if you need a hero rotator and you need like a 50-50 and you need a map and you need a contact block and whatever those are, it's really easy to plan out content architecture, right? Because you figure out however many different permutations of your blocks you need, and then you build those. If it's door number 2, and I see you saying it is door number 2, where you have a bunch of, sort of one-off unique blocks, you kind of have to play a game of, do we try to take those 400 blocks and move into a common content architecture where we say, here are the 30 components we're going to support on our Drupal 9 site, and all 400 of our blocks need to somehow map into those 30 components. Or we do want to allow a bunch of one-off blocks, in which case, I would seriously look at Site Studio, which is sort of designed to support that use case where you can build custom components, you can do a lot of custom styling and one-off content in Site Studio that does not require all the underlying like twig templates and functionality that you would expect for a normal Drupal block with Layout Builder. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you've got a ton of content types, a ton of blocks, whatever in Drupal 7, somebody should take the time to sit down, look at those examples, and really start walking through what are the use cases we're trying to support. And this fits very nicely into a migration planning perspective, right? Like, think about, what are we trying to do with this block? What are we trying to do with that block? You can start to categorize them. You can start to group them. You can start thinking through what fields do we need for these blocks in Drupal 9. And then you can sort of plan your migrate appropriately, right? These 20 blocks over here all kind of look, feel, and sound like the same thing. They're going to go this way. These 5 blocks over here are kind of like this. They're going to go that way. And that migration can handle that sort of mapping for you as part of the process.
Yeah, one new capability that would help with this a lot, I think, is in the same way that Drupal 7 had custom content types. You could have like article and page and blog. Drupal 8 and 9 have custom block types. So you can do exactly the same thing. So I think exactly what Mike just said, throwing all 400 of those on the table, trying to group them together, and then the logical clusters, making them separate block types is probably a way to get that to a manageable amount of data to look at.
Yep. Just from a sanity perspective and also an accessibility perspective and a mobile compatibility perspective, the more you can limit one-offs, the better. That's not to say you can't or shouldn't do one-offs, but the more you can use the entity display system to control what's coming out of your blocks, the more you can standardize and test, the better your end user experience is going to be, the more accessible your site's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And I had not actually flipped over to the questions slide, but obviously
we're answering questions.
So obviously, if you have questions, please continue to type. We'll answer them We really appreciate you joining us today. I think, I know, Angie, you said that the Migrate Accelerate product is still in development, but I think there's going to be an announcement on that coming in the not too distant future, right? If there are folks that are interested in participating in a beta or trying that out, do you have a timeline on that?
We are currently undergoing beta testing, but we're trying to wrap that up so we can actually get it released. So yeah, we're in this little middle area where we've done some beta testing with around 10 customers and partners, and got some really great, excellent feedback about the product and capabilities from that. Excuse me. And so the next step is to get it released and available to folks who are using Aqua Cloud. I think it's going to be available on Aqua Cloud Standard and above. So if you're out there and you're an Aqua customer, you got access to it. If you're not an Aqua customer, sadly, this will not help you currently anyway. But one thing that we are making sure to do with this product is every time we have to fix an upstream migration, or we find a bug in the core migrate API or something like that, those are always available as patches upstream. So you still benefit from this product even if you can't use it as an Aqua customer.
So question from Ed. We're working with a consultant for our migration. They helped us with D7, but I want more control over the front end, especially in terms of accessibility. Any suggestions for how to move forward with our D7 to D8 and D9 project? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. You know, the first thing you should always do if you have a focus on accessibility is start your project with a focus on accessibility, right? That starts with the design team. If you're doing new designs, or even if you're working with your existing design, make sure that your design team is focused on the accessibility requirements that you're trying to hit. As your development team starts doing whatever build or development that needs to be done, make sure you have accessibility requirements for any front-end work that is happening. Try integrating tools like Pally for automation to test accessibility. And if you don't have somebody at your organization or somebody with your contractor that is an actual expert in accessibility, I would seriously look into that, because to really make something accessible, you need to have folks that are testing with keyboards, with screen readers. Like, you can't just run Lighthouse in your browser. You can't just run Pally and expect to have an accessible, thanks for sharing the link there, Angie. You can't expect to have a perfectly accessible site. So, you know, much like you would build any other testing plan, have a plan for how you want to you know, be accessible. And, you know, there are even companies out there that have folks that are blind or that have other disabilities that you can, you know, hire to actually help you do testing, so that you don't have a sighted person trying to, you know, figure out, is this accessible? Like, let somebody who actually relies on those tools and has those needs participate in the testing, so they can tell you, yes, this would work for me, or no, it wouldn't. So that's really exciting that you guys are asking these questions, because so many organizations do accessibility as an afterthought. So, you know, thinking about it up front makes just everything better.
And one thing I wanted to point out, just to riff off that, is Drupal itself has an accessibility commitment. So for the core software, we make sure before any core patch goes in that it is WCAG 2.0 and ATAG 2.0 compatible. We're working on 2.1. You know, there's issues in the queue for it, but we haven't quite, you know, crossed that as the gate definement yet. But that's the goal, is to move all the way up to the latest set of the standards. And so we have an accessibility team, and they're a subsystem maintainer, effectively topic maintainer. And so it means that any UI affecting changes that happen in Drupal core have to be run through the accessibility team and ensure they pass the gates. And so, you know, it's a really powerful thing that Drupal has committed to all the way since Drupal 7, but the accessibility is only improved in Drupal 8 and 9 to make it even better. Oh, yeah, Stephen, thank you for the plug for accessibility office hours. That's right. Once a month, they get together, and you can just join and chat about what's, you know, happening. They often are reviewing core patches or talking about general best practices, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, and I actually blogged about this recently. Drupal itself is highly accessible out of the box. The thing that wrecks the accessibility is the custom development and content that you put into it. So the good news is you're starting from a really good place when you build with Drupal. You just have to be very cautious as your development team builds out your front end, and as your content team puts content in, that you're making decisions that maintain that high level that Drupal gives you out of the box. That's a great question. Thanks, Ed. What other questions do we have? Still have 25 plus folks in the room.
All right, I'll ask a question. Mike, what was the best and or biggest migrate experience that you had bringing a site from Drupal 7 to 9, where you're like, man, I never want to do that again, or where you're like, oh, this was so cool how we were able to do this?
I think the thing that I found that's really cool, if you don't mind me taking the second part of your question, is just the opportunity to really clean house, right? As an architect, I care a lot about standards. I care a lot about doing things in a repeatable and reusable way. And, everybody has a closet in their house or a room in their house that's a little junky because, sooner or later you're just kind of throwing stuff in there. And, so many older platforms can sort of turn into a junk room a little bit, right? Not that they're broken, not that they suck, but because they've just been hacked on and built on for so many years that they're overgrown at the very least. And I find there's so many new cool things that you can do with Drupal 8 and 9 that really give you a lot of room to sort of geek out and have fun with noodling on that architecture, especially content architecture, to make things better and more easily usable. Trying to think of a particularly bad D7 migration that I've done, and I'm not sure that I've done any recently. A lot of the builds I've done over the last couple of years have not been from D7.
Hey, Mike, this is Ed again. Is organic groups...
Can I jump in with a question?
Of course.
I'm just going to do it. Instead of ask you guys.
No, that's fine. Go for it. Is this Dorian?
Yes. We do have a fairly large D7 site, which we need to migrate. Seeing that D8's end of life is in a year, would you recommend what we're planning to do was migrate to D8, latest D8, and then worry about upgrading to D9 later? Or should we now consider going straight to D9?
Opinion, Angie, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to go for it?
I want to see if our opinions match. I would say in general, going straight to D9 would be the way I would recommend it, just because even though 8 to 9 is once again drastically straightforward compared to 7 to 8, it just is one extra step that you're going to have to plan for, and you're also going to have to plan for it sometime in the next year. So if it's possible, I would go straight to 9. I think the reasons not to do that would be if you're using several contrib modules that don't have availability for Drupal 9 and there's no patch in the queue to put it to Drupal 9, that kind of thing. That might be a reason to move to 8 first, because then you can get there and then worry about those modules filling in later or taking them on yourself if you have to, worst case scenario. But I would say in most cases, and what we do in our product as well, is move straight to 9 to just eliminate that middle step. But Mike, what do you think about that?
That is exactly what I would say. At this point, for those of you in the room that said you're already in process moving to Drupal 8, that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Drupal 8's awesome. You're not going to be sad. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking to start and dip a toe into this today, I would pretend like Drupal 8 doesn't exist as much as possible and go straight to 9.
Are we going to find a lot of modules which are in 8 but not yet in 9?
It depends how far off the beaten path you go. There's some really cool stuff that you can find using like the Rector project on Drupal.org that show you coverage of modules. I think it's something like 80% of the top 500, or maybe even higher than that. Now I forget Gabor's stats, but the vast majority of the top modules are in are Drupal 9 ready. If your sister's brother's BFF has a module that they wrote for a one-off thing 6 years ago in alpha, like maybe that's not ready to go, and that's legit. But
Probably wouldn't be an 8 either.
yeah, well, maybe, right? So
yeah,
that's,
maybe
that's
so.
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of my so that's, I think, Angie's most excellent point. Like, I would not blindly jump into 9. But I would definitely look at 9 and do a requirements gathering exercise, as we said earlier, and just make sure that there are no deal breakers. And even if there are deal breakers, you need to have that serious conversation with your team. Like, is this something that is so critical that it would stop us from jumping to Drupal 9?
Yeah, a year out is a great time to have those kinds of conversations.
Yes.
There was something else I was going to say about that. Yeah, I posted a link to the dashboard that we have set up that shows the different modules. The big thing is that in like a ton of cases, it looks like approximately 60% or so. The only thing you need to change from a Drupal 8 module to a Drupal 9 module is like an info file change, and that's it. It's one line that says instead of core 8, it's like Drupal core requirement version is 8 or 9, and that's it. That's all you need. And that is very different if you have a Drupal experience. Like, I came into Drupal in Drupal 4.6, and every upgrade, Drupal 4.6 to 4.7, 4.7 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7 has been like a nightmare. You might very much want to be like, we will stick with 8 because that's just one number jump. But honestly, the only difference between 9.0 and 8.9, the last version of Drupal 8 we put out, is literally we removed some backwards compatibility layers. That's it. That's the big paradigm change that we're seeing. Like, when we talk about Drupal 10, it's like, oh, that's scary. Oh, Drupal 10. But all Drupal 10 is going to be is the changes and improvements we managed to get into 9 from now until June of 2022, minus some API changes that we make. And that's it. And that's all it's going to be from here on out. We're trying really hard to build the next version of Drupal in the current version of Drupal, which is a really powerful change because it keeps the core committers and the core developers, as well as the users, all on the same platform. So we're fixing bugs that matter to people instead of working off here in sci-fi land of something that you're going to see, 3 years from now. So it's a really positive change. If you just have to make the jump from Drupal 7 in order to benefit from that. So.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's a
Thank
great
you.
question. Thank you. So Ed's asking, is moving from organic groups to groups a big undertaking? Ed, I know group is more of a thing in D8, D9 than OG, but I have not done that migration personally. My understanding is that it's a slightly different concept than organic groups, but aside from that, I don't know, Angie, if you have experience with it, but I'm not the right person to answer that question.
I'm also not exactly the right person to ask, but you've already accomplished step 1, which is figuring out that you're moving from organic groups to groups. So that's great.
That's a good first step.
Yeah, it's a good first step. That is actually on the list of our team working on Aqua and Migrate Accelerate to drill in on organic groups and that whole series of things and figure out what's needed there. We just haven't gotten there yet, and I'm hoping we can get there by the end of this year, or maybe early next year, something like that. But I don't have a thing. What I have basically heard through the grapevine is that, yeah, it is a different architecture between organic groups and groups, but people who use groups seem to like it quite a lot. So if you make the jump over there, it seems like that's a really quality move to make and a good, robust architecture for you to build from.
Jefferson asks, is there anything to keep in mind regarding mobile or multilingual? Multilingual, the best advice I can give you is try to start with multilingual if you're going to build a multilingual site. You can absolutely go back in Drupal 8 and 9 and retrofit an existing site to make it multilingual later. But adding multilingual capabilities to content types and blocks and views and all the things, that's a ton of config that you're adding. It's a ton of additional content work to add the translations. So, if you know you're going to be multilingual, and if you can plan an architect to be multilingual from the beginning, I think you will have a better experience. In terms of mobile, as much as possible, building your site to be mobile first, doing your designs to be mobile first, making sure that you're doing cross-browser testing, not just in the standard desktop browsers, but also in your tablet and mobile device viewports are really, really critical. And I think in general, those are just kind of industry standard best practice recommendations. I don't think there's anything, I can't think of anything Drupal specific to recommend for mobile.
No, I mean, the one thing you'll find with both multilingual and mobile is Drupal 8 and 9 have built-in support for those. So in Drupal 7, it was a big, philosophical, do I go with entity translation or content translation? And then that would set you up for all kinds of things. In Drupal 8, there's one way to do it, and it's powerful and it can capture all the different edge cases. So that's the first thing I'd point out. In Drupal, also for the mobile stuff, the only, we do have a few specific things. So for example, there's the notion of breakpoints is a concept within core, as well as like a responsive tables API, so that you can, specify in a view that these two columns are going to drop out once the column width gets to a certain period of time. So, mobile was a huge focus of the Drupal 8 release. And so a lot of the capabilities that built in at that time are available to you in Drupal 9 as well.
I'm actually really glad you said that, because I don't, I've not done a D7 multi-site or a multilingual site in a long, long time. One of the big Drupal 8 sessions I remember from DrupalCon when it was still in beta was, talking about like the 16 or 18 modules you needed in Drupal 7 to really make it fully multilingual, and literally Drupal 8 and 9 ship with everything out of the box you need. So it's a really exciting state of affairs. But like I said,
it's one of those things where it's like Drupal 8 came out in 2015, so you kind of are like, well, that's old news. But if you're still using Drupal 7, it's actually new to you, and it's a really powerful capability. So.
Yes. I think we might have time for one very quick last question, if there are any others. Going once, twice. Okay.
All right.
Well, hey, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of the day at Engage. And thank you for joining us.
Yep. Thanks so much, everyone.
See ya.